Alright, today we're looking at solving quadratics using the square root property. Over here on the top right of the page, I've got the steps that we need to take in order to solve these using square roots. Before we can take any square roots, we've got to make sure that our squared term is isolated. Okay, so if you're looking at these first few problems, our squared term is going to just be the p squared that we need to get by itself before I can take the square roots. If you're looking at stuff like the back page, down in here, our squared term is the entire parenthesis squared. Needs to be isolated before we can take the square roots. So we'll look at a couple of examples of each one. Again, very important rule, once you're ready to square root both sides, all right, the square root cancels the square on the left side of the equation. But on the right side of the equation, you need to put a plus or minus in front of your square root. Every single time you put your own square root there on the right-hand side. So let's look at some examples here. We're going to look at problem number 7. Okay, so again, our first rule, we need to make sure that we have our squared term isolated before we take the square root. So I got to get the m squared alone. So the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to subtract 9 from both sides. So I've got negative 10m squared equals negative 631 minus 9 more. It's negative 640. To isolate on my m squared, I need to divide by negative 10 since the negative 10 was attached. So I've got m squared equals negative 640 divided by negative 10 is going to be positive 64. Now that my m squared is isolated, now I can take the square root of both sides. So I square root the left and the right side. When I square root the left side, it cancels my squared and leaves me with just an m. When I square root the right, don't forget I need a plus or minus in front of this square root. So I've got a plus or minus, and then the square root of 64, we should know it off the top of our head, is just 8. So my two solutions there, m equals positive 8 and m equals negative 8. 10 now. Again, we need to isolate our squared term. So we will add 4. So I've got 2m squared equals 100. Isolating the squared term, we need to divide by 2. So now I've got m squared equals 50. Divide by 2 equals 50. Now we're ready to take the square root of both sides because my squared term is isolated. So I square root the left. It's going to cancel the square, leave me with just an m. And I'm also going to square root the right. Again, don't forget your plus or minus in front of the square root. So I'm going to have a plus or minus out here in front. Well, the square root of 50 is not a nice, pretty number. So we're going to use our prime factorization. What breaks down, what multiplies to give me 50? I've got 10 times 5. 5's prime, so we'll circle him. 10 breaks down again. 2 times 5. 2's prime and 5's prime, so we'll circle both of those. So once we've got all of our prime numbers, we're looking for pairs. I've got a pair of 5's that team up and go out together as 1. And then I've got a single 2 that's got to go back inside by himself. So my two solutions there, m equals positive 5 square root of 2 and m equals negative 5 square root of 2. But we can just write plus or minus instead of writing it out 2 separate times. So on this one, my right side wasn't a nice pretty square root like the first problem. So since it wasn't a nice pretty number, I actually have to break down the square root, and I'm still going to have a square root in my answer. Alright, look at some on the back. 16 was a popular question asked in class. So my parenthesis with a squared is isolated. There's no numbers outside the parenthesis here in front, and there's no numbers outside my parenthesis here at the end. Okay, so my parenthesis squared is isolated. My squared term is isolated, so I'm ready to move on to step 2 by taking the square root. So again, the square root cancels the square. So I just have a 4x minus 3 left over. And I also need to square root the right-hand side. Again, when I square root the right-hand side, I'm going to have a plus and a minus. Well, the square root of 36 is a 6. So on the right side, I have plus and minus 6. That means I have a positive 6 and I have a negative 6. I've got both numbers. It's going to give me two solutions. All right, so if we're solving for x here, now I need to add 3. So I've got 4x equals. Now when I add the 3 to the right side, I'm going to put it in the front. Now there's really no need for me to put a plus 3 in front. If it's just a 3, I know it's a positive 3. Slide your plus and minus 6 to the back. Now to solve for x, we're going to divide by 4 since he's attached, and we'll divide this entire right side by 4. So we're going to get two solutions here. The first solution is going to be 3 plus 6 divided by 4. So 3 plus 6 is 9 divided by 4, and that does not reduce, so we'll leave that alone. The second answer is going to be 3 minus 6 divided by 4. So 3 minus 6 is going to give me negative 3 divided by 4. And also negative 3 over 4 does not reduce either. So there are my two solutions there. So anytime your right side gives you a nice pretty whole number, your square root of 36 gave us a nice pretty whole number, we no longer have square roots in our solution. So we need to combine all of our constants and we need to simplify this. If it didn't break down nice and pretty and we still had a square root in our solution, then you wouldn't be able to combine the constants because they wouldn't be like terms. And 19. Last one we'll do here. Okay, so again, we have to isolate our squared term. So our parentheses with the squared needs to be by itself on the left-hand side. Well, I got a problem. I got a negative 4 here at the end. So to get rid of him, we got to add 4. So now my parentheses squared is going to be by itself, and on the right, 12 plus 4 turns into 16. Okay, isolate that squared term first. Now once it's isolated, we can take the square root of both sides. The square root cancels the square, so I just have an x minus 3 on the left. Don't forget the plus and minus in front of your square root on the right side. So it's plus and minus the square root of 16 turns into a nice pretty 4. So to solve for x, I need to add 3. So I've got x equals. Now when I add 3 to the right side, get in the habit of putting that in the front. I don't need to put a plus 3 in the front. I just need to put a 3. A plus 3 would be unnecessary. So put your positive 3 in the front and move your plus and minus 4 to the back. I don't want to leave my solution like that. I want to actually simplify it. I want to work it out. Tell me what two numbers x comes out to equal. So x equals, the first one's going to be 3 plus 4, which is 7. The second solution is going to be 3 minus 4, which is negative 1. X equals 7, x equals negative 1. Okay, so a couple different types of problems there, solving using square roots. You've got to isolate your squared term before you take your square roots. And when you do put a square root, make sure you have a plus or minus in front of the square root on the right-hand side.